Hello, good evening, and welcome everyone. It's lovely to see you all. We're back for our next and newest Gurdjieff project, Life is Real Only Then When I Am. The third in the All and Everything series, the third book in the series, and I'm very much looking forward to sharing this with you because, of course, on the channel we've been through, we did it out of order. Maybe Mr. Gurdjieff wouldn't be very happy about that, but we read Meetings with Remarkable Men first, and then Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, and now we will complete the All and Everything series with this text, Life is Real Only Then When I Am, and I have another Beelzebub commentary after, if anyone's interested in that. But let me first just give you a quick overview of what this book contains if you're new to the Gurdjieff ideas or have never read it before. This is one of the few records published by Gurdjieff in which he offers guidance to his community of seekers, the pupils from many countries who joined him in Paris and New York. At the end of Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, Gurdjieff wrote that the third series of his trilogy, All and Everything, would be made accessible only to the selected readers who had assimilated the contents of the first two series. As in all his teaching, Gurdjieff's aim in this third series was to assist the arising in the mentation and feeling of the reader of a true representation of the real world instead of the illusory world he now perceives. The book poses again in the uncompromising manner that experienced readers will recognize as unique to Gurdjieff's writing the question of the purpose of life and of man's own being. And so it's a very interesting text. There's a lot going on in it. And I'll just tell you what this evening we'll read. There's a prefatory note by V. Anastasieff, the foreword by Jean de Salzman, and the prologue. And the prologue is perhaps the longest chapter, by far the longest chapter. So this evening it will be quite a long reading as we work our way through the prologue. And then I think tomorrow we'll come back straight away and read the introduction, which is a little bit shorter. And then next week we will work our way through. There's 5 talks that follow that. And then the final part is the outer and inner world of man. And so before we get into the reading, let me just say hello to everyone. It's fantastic to see everyone. And for everyone to be here, a lot of faces from Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, of course. And welcome back. And it's good to see you all. Kathy says, greetings, Lewis and clubbers. It's been a while. So happy to see you, Kathy. I hope you're well. Very excited for this book. I read it a few months ago and was very impressed. I wonder what more information I'll get out of it a second time round. Do let us know, Kathy. Substance for the Soul is here. Says, hi, Lewis, Kathy, and everyone so ready for this adventure. Graham's in. J.K. Techers and Graham both say, hi, Lewis and all. Hi, Kathy and all. Everyone's saying hello. Leonardo is here. Laurie says, yay, hello, clubbers. Like a Kite has also arrived. Says, good evening to the shepherd and the book club flock. Welcome, Like a Kite. Stephen Larn says, hello, club wielders. Welcome, everyone. Spiritual Relief is also here. And I think that's everyone apart from Phil, who's just arrived and says, hello, hello. So, hello there, Phil. Welcome. If you're looking forward to Life is Real Only Then When I Am, J.G. Bennett's commentary on Beelzebub and the poll we have coming up tomorrow, there was a video about what we should read next away from the Gurdjieff material. If you're looking forward to all of that as much as I am, please consider liking the video, subscribe to the channel, share the show if you're lucky enough to have some Gurdjieff friends. And without further ado, I'll say hello to higher influences before we begin. And I think that's everyone. In this nice edition I have, it's a Routledge and Keegan Paul. We have a portrait here of Mr. Gurdjieff arriving in New York on the SS Parry, January 13th, 1924. And I'm just going to read this opening page, which I may well have read in all of it, but it just talks about the All and Everything series. It says All and Everything, 10 books in 3 series. The first series, the 3 books under the title of Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, or an objectively impartial criticism of the life of man. The second series, 3 books under the common title of Meetings with Remarkable Men. And the third series, 4 books under the common title of Life is Real Only Then When I Am. All written according to entirely new principles of logical reasoning and strictly directed towards the solution of the following 3 cardinal problems. The first series, to destroy mercilessly without any compromises whatsoever in the mentation and feelings of the reader the beliefs and views by centuries rooted in him about everything existing in the world. And if you are with us for Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, you'll know. The second series, to acquaint the reader with the material required for a new creation and to prove the soundness and good quality of it. And finally, the third series, which we are embarking on this evening, to assist the arising in the mentation and in the feelings of the reader of a veritable non-fantastic representation, not of that illusory world which he now perceives, but of the world existing in reality. And on that note, what we've just read, Donna says, I'm here, but don't tell G, because I've not finished his tales yet. I think he'll know. And here we have a little warning. I think this is G speaking directly to Donna, but don't go anywhere, Donna. Mr. Gurdjieff says here, no one interested in my writings should ever attempt to read them in any other than the indicated order. In other words, he should never read anything written by me before he is already well acquainted with the earlier works. And again, I didn't adhere to this advice either, because we read Meetings with Remarkable Men first. Of course, we began with Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous. And if I'm honest, I didn't have the confidence to go straight into Beelzebub's Tales, where we should have begun. But after reading Meetings with Remarkable Men, I thought that's the next logical step. And here we are with the next logical step after that. We have a prefatory note by Valentin Anastasiev. Although this text is no more than a fragmentary and preliminary draft of what G.I. Gurdjieff intended to write for the third series, Life is Real Only Then When I Am, his family feel obliged to obey our uncle's wish, as he emphasized in his introduction, to share with creatures similar to himself everything he had learned about the inner world of man. We consider we are being faithful to his intention when he wrote the introduction, and thus are also meeting the expectations of very many people interested in his teachings. On behalf of the family, Valentin Anastasiev. And I suppose I should read the title. Life is Real Only Then When I Am. And this is the Foreword by Gien de Salzman. Quote, this is Gurdjieff. My last book, through which I wish to share with other creatures of our common father, similar to myself, almost all the previously unknown mysteries of the inner world of man which I have accidentally learned. Gurdjieff wrote these words on the 6th of November 1934 and immediately started to work. For the next few months he devoted himself entirely to working out his ideas for this book. Then suddenly, on the 2nd of April 1935, he completely stopped writing. One is bound to ask, why did he abandon the project at this point and never return to it again? Why did he leave this third series unfinished and apparently give up his intention to publish it? It is not possible to answer these questions unless one has been oneself engaged in the intensive work which Gurdjieff undertook in the last 15 years of his life, with a certain number of pupils, creating for them day after day the conditions necessary for a direct and practical study of his ideas. He let it be clearly understood on the last page of Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson that the third series would be accessible only to those who would be selected as capable of understanding the genuine objective truths which he will bring to light in this series. Hello there, Anna. Welcome, and hello. And Donna says, hey, our G, Laurie, and SR, and one and all clubbers. Welcome, one and all. Mikkel's here as well. Says, I made it, so welcome. And Caroline Songbirds come in. Hello, everyone. Gurdjieff speaks to the man of today. Did I read that anyway? I don't think I did. I got distracted by the chat. I'm not being very conscious. He let it be clearly understood on the last page of Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson that the third series would be accessible only to those who would be selected as capable of understanding the genuine objective truths which he will bring to light in this series. Gurdjieff speaks of the man of today, that is, someone who no longer knows how to recognize the truth revealed to him in different forms since the earliest times, to someone with a deep sense of dissatisfaction, who feels isolated, meaningless. But given such a man, how to awaken in him an intelligence that can distinguish the real from the illusory? According to Gurdjieff, the truth can be approached only if all the parts which make up the human being, the thought, the feeling, and the body, are touched with the same force and in the particular way appropriate to each of them, failing which, development will inevitably be one-sided and sooner or later come to a stop. In the absence of an effective understanding of this principle, all work on oneself is certain to deviate from the aim. The essential conditions will be wrongly understood, and one will see a mechanical repetition of forms of effort which never surpass a quite ordinary level. Gurdjieff knew how to make us use every circumstance of life to have people feel the truth. I have seen him at work, listening to the possibilities of understanding in each of his groups and also to the subjective difficulties of each pupil. I have seen him deliberately putting the accent on a particular aspect of knowledge, then on another aspect according to a very definite plan, working at times with a thought that stimulated the intellect and opened up an entirely new vision, at times with a feeling that required giving up all artifice in favour of an immediate and complete sincerity, at times with the awakening and putting in motion of a body that responded freely to whatever it was asked to serve. So what did he have in mind in writing the third series? The role he assigned to it cannot be dissociated from his way of teaching. At the precise moment he found it necessary, he would have a particular chapter or a particular passage read aloud in his presence, bringing suggestions or images to his pupils which put them suddenly in front of themselves and their inner contradictions. It was a way that did not isolate them from life but passed through life, a way that took into account the yes and the no, the oppositions, all the contrary forces, a way that made them understand the necessity of struggling to rise above the battle while at the same time taking part in it. One was brought to a threshold to be crossed, and for the first time one felt that complete sincerity was required of one. It might appear to be a difficult passage, but what was being left behind no longer had the old attraction. In front of certain hesitations, the picture Gurdjieff gave of himself was a measure of what it was necessary to give and of what had to be given up in order not to take a wrong turn. Then it was no longer the teaching of the doctrine, but the incarnate action of knowledge. The third series, incomplete and unfinished as it is, reveals the action of the Master, the one who, simply by his presence, obliges you to come to a decision know what you want. Before he died, Gurdjieff sent for me to tell me how he saw the state of affairs and to give me certain instructions. Quote, publish as and when you are sure that the time has come. Publish the first and second series. But the essential thing, the first thing, is to prepare a nucleus of people capable of responding to the demand which will arise. So long as there is no responsible nucleus, the action of the ideas will not go beyond a certain threshold. That will take time, a lot of time even. To publish the third series is not necessary. It was written for another purpose. Nevertheless, if you believe you ought to do so one day, publish it. End quote. The task became clear to me. As soon as the first series had been published, it would be necessary to work without respite to form a nucleus capable, through its level of objectivity, devotion, and the demands it would make on itself, of sustaining the current that had been created. Jean de Salzman, author of The Reality of Being. Whew. That was just the foreword. Now we're going to read the prologue. It's very it's very autobiographical. Of course, Gurdjieff reverts back and goes back to the first and second series, also his own childhood and his upbringing, his experiences in life. And it's written rather strange. There's some italized sections, but if you look, this is how it's formatted in very short paragraphs. And of course, we're going to read it. As I said, it's rather lengthy. So I hope you're comfortable and you have a nice warm drink if you're in the UK, with the weather and the evenings and mornings drawing in, the wind getting up, and the nights getting shorter, or longer even, I should say. But anyway, enough about the weather. Let's get into Mr. Gurdjieff and the third series. Prologue. I am. But what has become of that full sensing of the whole of myself, formerly always in me in just such cases of self-questioning during the process of self-remembering? Is it possible that this inner ability was achieved by me, thanks to all kinds of self-denial and frequent goading, only in order that now, when its influence for my being is more necessary even than air, it should vanish without a trace? No, this cannot be. Something here is not right. If this is true, then everything in the sphere of reason is illogical. But in me is not yet atrophied the possibility of actualizing conscious labor and intentional suffering. According to all past events, I must still be. I wish and will be. Moreover, my being is necessary not only for my personal egoism, but also for the common welfare of all humanity. My being is indeed necessary to all people, even more necessary to them than their felicity and their happiness of today. I wish still to be. I still am. And that's an italicized opening section. By the incomprehensible laws of the association of human thoughts, now, before beginning to write this book, which will be my third, that is, my instructive series of writings, and, in general, my last book, through which I wish to share with the other creatures of our common Father, similar to myself, almost all the previously unknown mysteries of the inner world of man which I have accidentally learned, there has reoccurred to me the above-quoted self-reasoning which proceeded in me during an almost delirious state exactly 7 years ago today, and even, it seems to me, at this very hour. And just a quick comment, I mean, it's, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just so potent, Gurdjieff's writing, so direct, so clear, so objective, maybe not the right word, but is just so recognizable. You know, of course, I I of course very much enjoyed Beelzebub's tales, but it's nice to get back to the words of Gurdjieff. This fantastic soliloquy proceeded in me the 6th of November 1927, early in the morning in one of the Montmartre night cafes in Paris, where, tired already to exhaustion from my black thoughts, I had decided to go home and there once more to try whether I might perhaps succeed in sleeping at least a little. Although my health was then, too, in general bad, yet on this morning I felt particularly miserable. My miserable state on that morning was also further aggravated by the fact that during the last 2 or 3 weeks I had slept not more than 1 or 2 hours in 24, and this last night I had not been able to sleep at all. The fundamental cause of such sleeplessness and general disorder, in those days already excessive of nearly all the important functions of my organism, was the uninterrupted flowing in my consciousness of heavy thoughts about the apparently insoluble situation which had then unexpectedly arisen for me. In order to be able to explain, at least approximately, what this insoluble situation for me was, I must first say the following. For more than 3 years up till then I had been writing, almost day and night, with constant self-driving, the books I had resolved to publish. I say with constant self-driving because, due to the consequences of an automobile accident which happened to me just before beginning to write these books, I had been very ill and weak, and therefore, of course, had not had the possibility for any active action. Yet I had not spared myself, and had worked very hard in such a state, chiefly thanks to the factors that formed in my consciousness from the very beginning the following idée fixe notion, since I had not, when in full strength and health, succeeded in introducing in practice into the life of people the beneficial truths elucidated for them by me, then I must at least at any cost succeed in doing this in theory before my death. While writing out in outline during the first year the different fragments intended for publication, I had decided to write 3 series of books. I had decided with the contents of the first series of books to achieve the destruction in the consciousness and feeling of people of deep-rooted convictions which, in my opinion, are false and quite contradictory to reality. With the contents of the second series of books to prove that there exist other ways of perceiving reality and to indicate their direction. With the contents of the third series of books to share the possibilities which I had discovered of touching reality and, if so desired, even merging with it. With such intentions I began from the second year to write out this material in definite books, in a form now for general understanding. And just before the events I am now describing, I had finished writing all the books of the first series and was already working on the books of the second series. As I had the intention of publishing the first series of my writings the following year, I therefore decided, parallel with working on the books of the second series, to hold frequent public readings of the first series. I decided to do this in order, before finally sending them to press, to review them once more, but this time in accordance with the impressions with which different fragments were received by people of different typicalities and different degrees of mental development. And in view of this aim, I began from then on to invite to my city apartment different persons of my acquaintance of corresponding individuality to hear the chapter proposed for correction, which was read aloud by someone in their presence. At that time I had my principal place of residence for my whole family, as well as for myself, at Fontainebleau, but because of my frequent visits to Paris, I was obliged also to have an apartment there. During these common readings, in the presence of listeners of many different typicalities, while simultaneously observing the audience and listening to my writing, now all ready for publication, I, for the first time, very definitely established and clearly without any doubt, understood the following. Hey there, Melissa's Mind. Welcome to you. Welcome, everyone. For the first time, very definitely established and clearly, without any doubt, understood the following. The form of the exposition of my thoughts in these writings could be understood exclusively by those readers who, in one way or another, were already acquainted with the peculiar form of my mentation. Amen, Graham. That's right. But every other reader for whom, strictly speaking, I had goaded myself almost day and night during this time would understand nearly nothing. During this common reading, by the way, I enlightened myself for the first time with regard to the particular form in which it would be necessary to write in order that it might be accessible to the understanding of everyone. So, when I had clarified all this to myself, there just then appeared before me, in all its splendour and full majesty, the question of my health. Above everything else, there then flowed in my consciousness the following thoughts. If all this, which was written during 3 or 4 years of almost unceasing day and night work, were to be rewritten from the beginning in another form more accessible to the understanding of every reader, at least the same length of time would be required. But time is needed for the exposition of the second and third series, and time will be also necessary for introducing into practical life the essence of these writings of mine. But where can so much time be obtained? If my time depended solely upon me, I could, of course, rewrite all this anew. Moreover, from the very beginning of this new writing, I would acquire the certainty of a peaceful end, for now, knowing how to write, I could fully expect that at least after my death the principal aims of my life would certainly be realized. But due to all kinds of accumulated consequences of my past life, it so happens that just now my time depends not upon me, but exclusively upon the self-willed Archangel Gabriel. And indeed there remains to me but 1 or 2, or perhaps at the most 3 years more of life. Concerning this, that is, that I have soon to die, any one of hundreds of physician specialists knowing me can now confirm. Besides this, I myself, in my past life, had not in vain been known as a good, above-the-average diagnostician. Not for nothing had I, during my life, held many conversations with thousands of candidates for a speedy departure from this world. It would, strictly speaking, even be unnatural if it were not so, for the processes of the involution of my health during my past life had proceeded many times more rapidly and intensively than the process of its evolution. In fact, all the functions of my organism, which previously had been, as my friends say, steel cast, had gradually degenerated so that, at the present moment, due to constant overworking, not one of them was even relatively functioning properly. This was not at all to be wondered at, even without considering the many other events unusual in human experience which had taken place in the accidentally peculiar pattern of my past life. It would be enough to recall that strange and inexplicable destiny pursuing me, which consisted in my having been wounded 3 times in quite different circumstances, each time almost mortally, and each time by a stray bullet. If the full significance of only these 3 incidents were comprehended, which inevitably implanted ineffaceable results in my body, one could understand that they in themselves were sufficient to have caused my final end long ago. And Graham says he's writing about our struggles as well as his own. Gurdjieff never misses an opportunity to teach. And I agree. And so, as I said, this is like loosely autobiographical, and he's going to go back and tell us about these 3 stray bullets that caused him a lot of trouble. Yeah, thanks, Mikkel, and you guys too. Be present. The first of these 3 incomprehensible, fateful events happened in 1896 on the island of Crete, 1 year before the Greco-Turkish War. From there, while still unconscious, I was brought, I don't know why, by some unknown Greeks to Jerusalem. Soon, with consciousness returned, although with my health not yet quite restored, I, in the company of other, just such as myself, seekers of pearls in manure, set out from Jerusalem for Russia, not by water as normal people ordinarily do, but by land, on foot. From such wandering, continuing about 4 months, nearly always through places almost impassable, with my health still in precarious condition, there must of course have been implanted in my organism for the rest of my life some chronically manifesting factors of evil influence upon my health. In addition to everything else, during this foolish trip, there visited me and found delight in my body, for quite a long stay, some specific delicacies of local character, among which, by the way, were the honoured and famous Kurdistan tsinga, scurvy, the not less famous Armenian dysentery, and of course that common and omnipresent favourite of many names, la grippe, or influenza. After this, willy-nilly, I had to live some months without absenting myself at home in Transcaucasia, and then again began, animated, of course, as always, by the idée fixe of my inner world, various trips through all kinds of bush and jungle. And this time, in my unfortunate physical body, I again played host, during their long visits, to many other specific delicacies of local character. Among such new guests were the honoured Ashkabadian Bedinka, Bokharan malaria, Tibetan hydropsy, Belukistan dysentery, and many others who also left their calling cards permanently whenever they called. In the following year, my organism, although it had already acquired immunity from all such local delicacies, nevertheless could not, of course, due to its increasing tenseness, eradicate the consequences of these old delicacies. Under such conditions of tension, years passed. Then, for this unfortunate physical body of mine, came another year of destiny, 1902, when I was punctured by a second stray bullet. This occurred in the majestic mountains of Tibet, 1 year before the Anglo-Tibetan War. On this second occasion, my unfortunate physical body was able to elude destiny because near me there were 5 good physicians, 3 of European education, and 2 specialists of Tibetan medicine, all 5 very sincerely devoted to me. And just the way, obviously it's explicit what Gurdjieff's doing here, but as I mentioned all throughout the reading of Beelzebub's tales, that throughout the reading of Beelzebub's tales, because of where Beelzebub is situated relative to humanity, to the 3 brain beings breeding on the planet Earth, and he talks about the 3 brain beings breeding on the planet Earth sort of very objectively, like a scientist would maybe talk about some ants or some rats or some slugs, as Hussein calls us. Here he does something similar, but while talking about himself, right? For this unfortunate physical body. So he's not, we would say me or I was ill, I was injured, I sprained my ankle, I cut my arm. But Gurdjieff is saying, on this second occasion, my unfortunate physical body was able to elude destiny. In a sense, not identifying with it, because we would say I got shot would be the normal way to phrase it, not my physical body received some steel from a gun, But anyway, I just thought I'd share that because it reminded me of the feeling I would get reading Beelzebub's tales, not to be identified with this planet or this physical body, and by so not being identified or less identified, the sort of the hope and fear that they lessen somewhat. They're not so if you've really identified with something, then in a sense, you become that thing. You are that. But let's carry on. After 3 or 4 months of unconscious life, for me, there flowed still another year of constant physical tenseness and unusual psychic contrivance, and then came my third fateful year. This was at the end of 1904 in the Transcaucasian region in the neighborhood of the Chiatura Tunnel. Speaking about this third stray bullet, I cannot here deny myself the opportunity, for the pleasure of some and for the displeasure of others of my acquaintances of the present time, of now saying openly about this third bullet that it was plunked into me, of course unconsciously, by some charmer from among those two groups of people who, fallen on one side under the influence of the revolutionary psychosis, and on the other under the sway of imperious superiors, accidental upstarts, together laid then also, of course, unconsciously, the basic foundation stones of the groundwork of the, at least today indeed, Great Russia. There then proceeded firing between the so-called Russian army, chiefly Cossacks, and the so-called Gorians. In view of the fact that certain events in my life, beginning with this third nearly fatal wound and up to the present time, have among themselves, as I have recently noticed, a very strange and at the same time very definite connection in terms of one physical law, I will therefore describe some of these events with as much detail as possible. It is necessary, before going further, to mention here also that on the evening of November the 6th, 1927, when, after a good sleep, I began to think of the situation that had arisen for me, then into my consciousness flashed one idea, among others, which then appeared to me entirely absurd. But now, after having constated unexpectedly and having elucidated during the last 7 years various facts previously unknown to me, I have become convinced without any doubt that it must be true. And so, at the time of this third bullet, near me, there was only one man, and at that a very weak one. As I learned later, he, surmising that the situation and surrounding circumstances were such that very undesirable consequences might arise for me, quickly somewhere found a donkey, and, placing me completely unconscious on it, in haste drove it far into the mountains. There he put me in some cave, and himself went to look for help. He found some kind of a barber physician and necessary bandages, and returned with them late in the evening. They did not find anyone in the cave, and were astounded, because neither could I have left by myself, nor could anyone else have come there, and as far as wild animals were concerned, they knew well that in this region, aside from deer and goat and sheep, there were no animals. They noticed traces of blood, but it was impossible to follow them because the night had already fallen. Only the next morning, when it began to dawn after spending the whole night in anxiety and fruitless search in the forest, did they find me between some rocks, still alive, and apparently sound asleep. The barber immediately found some roots, and with these he made a temporary tourniquet, and after giving instructions to my weak friend what to do, he at once set out somewhere. Late in the evening he returned, accompanied by two of his friends called kevsers, with a 2-wheeled cart to which were harnessed 2 mules. Hello there, Doge, and welcome. And yes, this is a little bit different to Dahl's Boy, but enjoy. And if you remember back to Beelzebub's Tales in the Arousing of Thought, the first chapter, he shares in detail about the crash. And this is quite similar. He had a terrible crash, driving very fast, and hit a tree. And when the people discovered him, whoever it was that discovered him, I don't know if it's important, he had got sort of a pillow and some blankets out of the car and was lying on the ground, sound asleep, and really should have ended him, the crash. And here again, he's saying this is obviously, I think, happened before that, but the fact that he's left the cave, found himself a way to, between some rocks, and fallen asleep there. So maybe it's the sort of the soul, the master taking over and taking control and making him go off somewhere safe. But who knows? It's only speculation, isn't it? Late in the evening, he returned, accompanied by two of his friends. Oh, I've just read that bit. That evening, they drove me still higher into the mountains and again placed me in a cave, but this time a large one, adjacent to another immense cave in which, as later appeared, sat and reclined, perhaps contemplating human life of past and future ages, several score Kevzurian dead, mummified by the rarefied air of that high place. In this cave, where they placed me for 2 weeks in the presence of the aforementioned weak man, the barber, and one young Kevsur, there proceeded in me the struggle between life and death. After that, my health began to improve at such a pace that in 1 week more my consciousness had entirely returned, and I could already move about with the help of someone and a stick, and a couple of times even visit the secret meeting of my immortal neighbours. At this time it was ascertained that below, in the process of civil war, the upper hand, as it is said, had been taken by the Russian army, and that already everywhere the Cossacks were poking about and arresting every suspicious inhabitant who was not a native. As I was not a native and knew also the process of the mentation of the people fallen under a revolutionary psychosis, I decided to flee from these parts as soon as possible. And that's something to consider and keep in mind, especially with the way the world is going. The mentation of people fallen under a revolutionary psychosis, or there's many psychoses that groups of people can fall under, but it's something to keep in mind, just like Gurdjieff saying, this unfortunate body, we can say those people under a revolutionary psychosis, and in a sense it creates a separation, and one isn't so emotional or identified with the occurrence or the goings on. And of course it doesn't make it go away or make it easier, but again, bit of separation. Taking into consideration the surrounding conditions of the Transcaucasian region as a whole and my personal prospects for the future, I decided to go into the Transcaspian region. Subjected to incredible physical sufferings, I set out in the company of the above-mentioned weak man. I experienced unbelievable sufferings, chiefly because I had everywhere on the way to preserve an unsuspicious exterior. An exterior not arousing suspicion was necessary so as not to become a victim either of this political psychosis or of the so-called national psychosis. The fact of the matter is that in places where the railroad passed, there had only recently been completed a so-called realization of a higher gradation of the national psychosis, in this instance between the Armenians and Tartars, and some peculiarities of this human scourge still continued to flow by momentum. That's right, guys. Yes, there's lots going on in the very difficult to verify. Gurdjieff would always exhort everyone to verify these things, verify what he's saying, verify his perspectives about sleep and, different centers and all these things. And Spiritual Relief says, welcome to 2019 to 2024, G. And yes, these psychoses that are inflicted upon people, I think, from outside, it's an external force that they allow in. And Graham says today, people falling under conspiracy theories. And there's funny, I dabble myself in conspiracy theories, and they say that the only difference between conspiracy theory and conspiracy fact is about 6 months. So, and reported stolen. Hello there, my friend. Says the Kool-Aid has been flowing as of late, and it's a sad analogy, really, because I read a great book by Jeff Gwynne on the Jim Jones. It's a very sad last couple of chapters, so I won't say more about that. But let's go. Let's go. Where were we? My misfortune in this case consisted in the fact that, having a universal appearance, I represented to the Armenians a pure-blooded Tartar, and to the Tartars a pure-blooded Armenian. To make a long story short, I, by hook or by crook, in the company of this weak friend of mine, and with the help of a mouth harmonica, arrived in the Transcaspian region. This mouth harmonica, which I discovered in the pocket of my coat, rendered us great service. On this original instrument I then played, I confessed, not badly, although I played only 2 tunes, the Peaks of Manchuria and Vols Ozidani. Arriving in the Transcaspian region, we decided, for the time being, to establish ourselves in the city of Ashgabat. We rented 2 good rooms in a private house with a charming garden, and I could finally rest. Yet on the first morning, when my only near person there went to a pharmacy to get for me the necessary medicaments, is that a word? Medicaments? Well, it's in the book, so Yet, on the first morning, when my only near person there went to a pharmacy to get for me the necessary medicaments, he did not return for a long time. Hours passed, but still he did not come. He did not come. I began to be anxious, chiefly because I knew that he was here for the first time, and did not yet know anybody. Night is falling, and I have no more patience. I am going to look for him. But where? First of all, I go to the pharmacy. There they know nothing. Suddenly, listening to my questions, the druggist's boy says that he saw this same young man who was there in the morning arrested by the police in the street not far from there and taken away somewhere. What is to be done? Where to go? I know no one here, and besides I am hardly able to move, because during the last few days I have become completely exhausted. When I leave the pharmacy, it is almost completely dark in the street. By chance an unoccupied carriage passes. I ask to be taken to the centre of the city, somewhere near the bazaar, where, after the stores close, there is still life. I decide to go to such a place in the hope of meeting, perhaps, in one of the cafes or chaikhanas, someone of my acquaintance. I am barely moving through narrow streets and come across only small ashkhanas, where only the Tekinians sit. I am weakening more and more, and in my thoughts already flashes a suspicion that I may lose consciousness. I sit down on the terrace in front of the first chaikhana I pass and ask for some green tea. While drinking some tea, I come to thank God and look around on the space dimly lit by the street lantern. I see a tall man with a long beard in European clothing pass by the chaikhana. His face seems familiar. I stare at him while he, already coming near, also looking at me very intently, passes on. Proceeding further, he turns round several times and looks again at me. I take a risk and call after him in Armenian. Either I know you or you know me. He stops and, looking at me, suddenly exclaims, "Ah, black devil," and walks back. It was enough for me to hear his voice, and already I knew who he was. He was no other than my distant relative, the former police court interpreter. I already knew that several years before he had been exiled to some place in the Transcaspian region, but to where I did not know. And I also knew that the reason for his exile was that he had stolen the affections of the paramour of the chief of police. Can you imagine my inner exultation at such a meeting? I will not describe how and about what we talked while sitting on that terrace of the small chaikhana and continuing to drink green tea. I will only say that on the following morning this distant relative of mine, the former police official, came to me accompanied by his friend, a police lieutenant. From them I learned first that nothing serious threatened my companion. He was arrested only because he was here for the first time, and nobody here had ever seen him before. And as there were now many dangerous revolutionaries everywhere, he was arrested only in order to establish his identity. This, they say, is not a complicated thing. They will write to the place where his passport was issued and order an inquiry into his political reliability. But if he must, in the meanwhile, disport himself with fleas and lice, what of it? To experience this is a very good thing as a preliminary education for the future life. And secondly, added my distant relative, lowering his voice, your name appears on the list of sources disturbing for the peace of visitors to Montmartre, places of frivolous amusement. On this account, and also because of some other considerations, I, still in a very sick condition, decided to leave this place also as quickly as possible, for I could do nothing to help my friend. Now entirely alone, and moreover with very limited funds, I set out in the direction of Central Asia. After overcoming with unimaginable difficulties every kind of great and small obstacle, I came to the city of Yangihisar, in the former Chinese Turkestan, where, from old friends of mine, I supplied myself with money, and then found myself in that same place where I had lived several years before, while recovering my health when it had been shattered because of stray bullet number 2. This place is located on the southwestern edge of the Gobi Desert and represents, to my mind, the most fertile of all the parts of the surface of our earth. And concerning the air of this place and its salutary influence on everyone inhaling it, I will say that it is truly purgatorial. If in reality there exist paradise and hell, and if from them arise any radiation, then the air in the space between these two sources would surely have to be similar to this. For on one side is a soil which almost literally pours from itself, as from a cornucopia, all kinds of earthly flora, fauna, and foscalia, and right next to this fertile soil is an area of many thousands of square kilometers representing literally hell, where not only nothing crops up, but anything originating elsewhere that happens to get in its midst is destroyed in a very short time, leaving no trace. Namely, here on this small singular piece of the hard surface of our earth, the air of which, that is, our second food, originates and is transformed between the forces of paradise and hell. In me there had proceeded, at the end of my first visit there, then also in an almost delirious condition, just that same self-reasoning concerning which in my consciousness on the evening of November the 6th, as I have mentioned above, there flashed an idea which appeared to me then entirely absurd. And this is a very interesting bit, I think, where he comes to maybe remember himself for the first for the first time, I think, perhaps. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, as I often do. And now I've lost my place, so it's all going very well. The first time my friends brought me here in an unconscious condition soon after I had been wounded by the second stray bullet. At the beginning near me were many friends, among whom were also 5 mentioned physicians. And when, after the return of consciousness, I began to improve, all of them gradually went away, and I remained there with only one Tibetan and one very young Kara Kyrgyz. Living there, far from people of all sorts, attended by these 2 sympathetic people who treated me almost maternally, and all the time nourished by the above-mentioned cleansing air, I, within 6 weeks, recovered so that I already wished and was able at any moment to leave this salutary place. Everything was already gathered and packed, and we waited the coming of the young Kara Kyrgyz father with his 3 camels in order to proceed on the journey. Oh, hello there, Voldemar. Or Waldemar, welcome. Nice to see you. It's been a long time. I hope you're well. As I had information that in one of the valleys of the mountain, then called the Peak of Alexander III, there were at that time several Russian officers, topographers of the Turkestan Topographical Administration, among whom was one of my very good friends, I intended first to go to them, and from there to join some large caravan, and travel first to Andijan, then to the Transcaucasian region to see my relatives. I was by that time, though not yet entirely, as it is said, strong on my feet, and already feeling quite well. It was night. The moon was out. The full moon was out. Thinking along paths of current associations, unnoticeably my thoughts passed again to the question which by this time had become finally transformed into the idée fixe of my inner world. Continuing to think about this under the influence from one side of a distant hollow din formed from sounds of milliards of lives of all possible outer forms, and from the other side of an awesome silence, in me gradually rose in relation to myself a critical faculty of unprecedented strength. At the beginning there were recollected in me all my blunders in my former searches, while from one side I constated my blunders, and in general the imperfections of the methods previously applied by me, from the other side it became clear how I ought to have acted in this or that instant. I remember very well how my strength waned from these tense thoughts, and during this some part of me time and again ordered me to get up quickly and rouse myself in order to stop such thoughts, but this I could not do, so strongly had I been involved in these same thoughts. I don't know with what this would have ended if, at the moment when instinctively I began to feel that I must lose consciousness, the 3 camels near me had not sat down. At this I came to myself and got up. By this time day was already dawning. Awake also were my young companions, who were already busying themselves with the usual preparations for morning life in the desert. After talking with the old man, we decided to take advantage of the moonlight and set out in the evening. Moreover, the camels could rest well during the day. Instead of lying down to sleep a while, I took with me a rifle and a travelling pail made of canvas and went to a nearby spring of very cold water on the very edge of the desert. Undressing, I began very slowly to pour this cold water over me. After this I felt quite well mentally. Physically I became so weak that after dressing I was compelled to lie down there near the spring. And then, being so weak physically and very well refreshed mentally, there proceeded in me that same self-reasoning, the essence of which became impressed in my consciousness for ever, and concerning which on the evening of November the 6th, 1927, flashed the mentioned idea. Due to its remoteness, I do not remember the exact words of that first self-reasoning so discordant with my usual general state. But having preserved in myself the, so to say, taste of it, I can recollect it exactly, though in different words. It consisted of the following. And so here I think is where he goes into this thought that comes to him about self-remembering, if I remember rightly, remembering himself always and everywhere. And then he goes on to talk about God, and it's a very interesting conception of God, because I resonate with it. Yes, Kathy, yeah, you and me both. That's what I was just saying. It's very powerful, this next part, as Kathy's saying there. I love this next part, and I understand why, Kathy, so let's go. Judging by my fitness during the last few days, it seems I again have come to life and willy-nilly will have to drag on and drudge as before. My God! Is it possible that I will have to experience again all that I lived through during periods of my fully collective active state for the half year before this last misfortune of mine? Not only to experience feelings alternating almost regularly between remorse for the inner and outer manifestations of my ordinary waking state, and loneliness, disappointment, satiety, and the rest, but primarily to be everywhere haunted by the fear of inner emptiness. What also I have not done, what resources have I not exhausted, in my determination to reach a state where the functioning of my psyche in my usual waking state would flow in accordance with the previous instructions of my active consciousness, but all in vain. In my past life, being forever merciless to my natural weaknesses, and almost all the time jealously keeping watch over myself, I could attain almost anything within the limits of man's possibilities, and in some fields attained even to such a degree of power as not one man, perhaps not even in any past epoch, had ever attained. For instance, the development of the power of my thoughts had been brought to such a level that, by only a few hours of self-preparation, I could, from a distance of tens of miles, kill a yak, or in 24 hours could accumulate life forces of such compactness that I could, in 5 minutes, put to sleep an elephant. At the same time, in spite of all my desires and endeavours, I could not succeed in remembering myself in the process of my general common life with others, so as to be able to manifest myself not according to my nature, but according to the previous instructions of my collected consciousness. I could not attain the state of remembering myself even sufficiently to hinder the associations flowing in me automatically from certain undesirable hereditary factors of my nature. As soon as the accumulation of energy which enabled me to be in an active state was exhausted, at once associations of both thoughts and feelings began to flow in the direction of objects diametrically opposite to the ideals of my consciousness. When I found myself in a state of complete dissatisfaction with food and sex, the leading factor of these associations of mine appeared to be primarily revenge, and in a state of full satisfaction they proceeded on a theme of the forthcoming pleasure of a meal and sex, or of the gratification of self-love, vanity, pride, jealousy, and other passions. I thought deeply myself and tried to find out from others about the reasons for such a terrible situation within my inner world, but could not clarify anything at all. From one side, it is clear that it is necessary to remember myself during the process of ordinary life also, and from the other side that there is a necessity for the presence of attentiveness which is able to merge in case of contact with others. Though in my past life I had tried everything, even had worn reminding factors of all kinds on my person, nothing helped. Perhaps these did help a little while I carried them on me, but if so, it was only at the beginning. As soon as I stopped carrying them or got used to them, in a moment it was as if before. There is no way whatsoever. However, there is. There is one exit only, to have outside myself, so to say, a never-sleeping regulating factor, namely, a factor which would remind me always in my very common state to remember myself. But what is this? Can it be really so? A new thought? Why, hitherto could there not have come to my head such a simple thought? Did I have to suffer and despair so much in order only now to think of such a possibility? Why could I not in this instance also look to a universal analogy? And here also is God, again God. Only He is everywhere, and with Him everything is connected. I am a man, and as such I am, in contrast to all other outer forms of animal life, created by Him in His image. For He is God, and therefore I also have within myself all the possibilities and impossibilities that He has. The difference between Him and myself must lie only in scale. For He is God of all the presences in the universe. It follows that I also have to be God of some kind of presence on my scale. He is God and I am God. Whatever possibilities he has in relation to the presences of the universe, such possibilities and impossibilities I should also have in relation to the world subordinate to me. He is God of all the world and also of my outer world. I am God also, although only of my inner world. He is God and I am God. For all and in everything, we have the same possibilities and impossibilities. Whatever is impossible or possible in the sphere of his great world should be possible or impossible in the sphere of my small world. This is as clear as that after the night must inevitably come the day. But how could I have failed to notice such a startling analogy? I had thought so much about world creation and world maintenance, and in general about God and his deeds, and also had discoursed with many others about these matters, but never once had there come to my mind this simple thought. And yet it could not be otherwise. Everything without exception, all sound logic as well as all historical data, reveal and affirm that God represents absolute goodness. He is all loving and all forgiving. He is the just pacifier of all that exists. And I'll just give a quick association of my thoughts for that section, because that's the bit that really struck me, in that with this conception of God, Gurdjieff brings in, of course, the Abrahamic faith, because of the term God. That's often what people associate with the word God, right? Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. But then he goes on to say and affirm that God represents absolute goodness, which would be a Platonic conception, the good, the one. If you've read The Republic, you'll know about this. But then he also goes on to use the terms all loving and all forgiving. And this is an Islamic perspective. They have the 99 names of Allah, and the Sufi Islam, they recite it. It's called dhikr, remembrance, and they recite the 99 names of Allah, and they go round it. It's sort of like the Hare Krishna mantra, but maybe you could argue more complicated, more complex, because there's 99 names to remember, not just Hare Krishna, Hare Rama. But in the Quran, in Beelzebub's tales to his grandson, Gurdjieff uses this language, all loving and all forgiving. He's the just pacifier of all that exists. So in that small paragraph, we had a very good conception as to Gurdjieff's view. Of course, when he's talking to Ouspensky in Search the Miraculous, it just referred to as the absolute. But this is sort of filling that term out. Anyway, that's what I think about it. You tell me what you think in the chat. But at the same time, why should he, being as he is, send away from himself one of his nearest, by him animated, beloved sons, only for the way of pride proper to any young and still incompletely formed individual, and bestow upon him a force equal but opposite to his own? I refer to the devil. This idea illuminated the condition of my inner world like the sun, and rendered it obvious that in the great world, for the possibility of harmonious construction, there was inevitably required some kind of continuous perpetuation of the reminding factor. For this reason, our Maker himself, in the name of all that he had created, was compelled to place one of his beloved sons in such an, in the objective sense, invidious situation. Therefore, I also have now for my small inner world to create out of myself, from some factor beloved by me, an alike unending source. There arises now a question like this: what is there contained in my general presence which, if I should remove it from myself, would always in my various general states be reminding me of itself? Thinking and thinking, I came to the conclusion that if I should intentionally stop utilizing the exceptional power in my possession which had been developed by me consciously in my common life with people, then there must be forced out of me such a reminding source, namely the power based upon strength in the field of Handlungszeug, or, as it would be called by others, the power of telepathy and hypnotism. Thanks mainly to this, my inherency developed in me by myself, I, in the process of general life, especially for the last 2 years, had been spoiled and depraved to the core, so that most likely this would remain for all my life. And so, if consciously I would deprive myself of this grace of my inherency, then undoubtedly always and in everything its absence would be felt. I take an oath to remember never to make use of this inherency of mine, and thereby to deprive myself from satisfying most of my vices. In the process of living together with others, this beloved inherency will always be a reminder for me. So that is the end of the idolized reminiscings, and we have a few comments on my comment. Spiritual Leaf says, my Sufi teacher shared that God is beautiful was the only thing I had to take on faith. The rest he could prove. And Mikhail says, I wonder, and behold, I am with you all days, even to the consummation of the world. Matthew 28:20. What's that which is with us all throughout all our lives? Isn't it existence itself? And I'd say yes. Yeah. Spiritual Relief agrees, says existence is enough proof of divinity for me, full stop. Very nice, guys. Lovely comments there. But there's a section here early on. He says, where is it? I think it's in here. Bear with me. Let me try and find it, because it's pretty powerful when he starts talking about God and how and here also is God, again God, only he is everywhere, and with him everything is connected. So similar to what Spiritual Relief and Mikkel are saying, it's there, you know. I am a man, and as such I am in contrast to all other outer forms of animated life created by him in his image. And the Hermetic maxim, as above, so below, right? And the fact that, yeah, in Search the Miraculous, we have this diagram, the ray of creation, and it just shows how we are connected. Plotinus would say that material, is the furthest thing from the good, from God, and so he would perceive it as evil. Whereas Iamblichus would say that matter, the material world, the cosmos, has the potential to be divinized. We can, Gurdjieff says we can raise our consciousness, we can raise our being, and by so doing, again, raise the vibrations. I'm not going to digress into raising vibrations, but if you read In Search the Miraculous or Beelzebub's Tales, you'll discover it. And Graham says, no man will ascend to heaven until he first comes down from heaven. And I think there's something similar that Carl Jung says. He says, no man's branches can ascend to heaven unless his roots descend down into hell. I think that was Carl Jung. And Hello There, Ride Forever says a cryptic question: how many hours are you ready for? So I don't know what that means. How many hours am I going to read for, or did we read for? I don't understand. But we've been reading for 1 hour 14 minutes, and I imagine that we have about another hour and 14 minutes. Let me put a little thing here so my brain knows how many pages we got, and as we're approaching the end, so another hour, I'm guessing, if you want to know when to put your activities. Spiritual Relief says another share is that humans have secret connections between our hearts, and I'd agree with that, and maybe that's why these lives are so wonderful, because we're all here, right? We're all here connected through this voice, I suppose, would be the connecting factor, this screen, this book. But I think we are connected. I think it's wonderful that we're all here together. So, yeah, thanks for being here, because other people, maybe they can feel the heart connection, but maybe not so strongly. Mikkel says, this Gurdjieff bloke seems legit, right? Yeah, I would agree with that, Mikkel. He's, I'd say he's legit. And again, I would never say and tell people that he is legit. I'd say go and verify for yourself. Saint Pat says, God is our being, I am in heaven. So that's wonderful, and we are one. So you're obviously having a good day there, Saint Pat, and peace be with you. Fantastic. Mikhail says we're connected. Laurie says we are pieces of that heaven. Donna, the invisible thread. Saint Pat, all is one. Goodness me, this is Laurie says chat is getting lit. Boy, it is getting lit. Thanks to Mr. Gurdjieff. Kathy says, in order to go higher, you need to fall low first. Yeah, I think that's right. And Gurdjieff also says that in order to go higher, you need to bring someone with you onto the step that you're on in order for you to go up to the next step. And St. Pat says, peace to you all in love. And thank you very much for that. And let's get back to the text. Like I say, we've finished the italized little section, and now we're back to the Times New Roman Standard. Never so long as I live shall I forget what state of mind resulted then when, on the last day of my presence in that place, there happened the above given self-reasoning which terminated in the conclusion which I have given above. As soon as I realized the sense of this idea, I was as if reincarnated. I got up and began to run around the spring without knowing what I was doing, like a young calf. It all ended thus, that I decided to take an oath before my own essence in a state of mind known to me never again to make use of this property of mine. I must also mention that when I took the oath not to apply in life this inherency of mine, I made a reservation that my oath should not concern the application of it for scientific purposes. For instance, I was very much interested then, and even now my interest has not entirely vanished, in increasing the visibility of distant cosmic centres many thousand times through the use of a medium, and in the cure of cancer by the power of suggestion. All this was about 2 years prior to this, my second sojourn here. And so there, just it's a throwaway line, but he's saying, the external factor that he's going to take out of himself in order to always remember himself is he's not going to use telepathy or hypnosis. And he goes on to say, unless I'm doing an experiment or scientific purposes. And then he goes on to say, increasing the visibility of distant cosmic centers many thousand times through the use of a medium, and in the cure of cancer by the power of suggestion. Okay then. Toward the end of this second sojourn in my being, the basic aim of almost all my life split into two definite aspects, and this time also, thanks to my unhindered free mentation, that is, mentation which proceeded without the effects of the automatic influences of other people. The trouble is that until this time the aim of my inner world had been concentrated only on my one unconquerable desire to investigate from all sides and to understand the exact significance and purpose of the life of man. Until this time in my life, every activity into which I had rushed, every failure or success, had been connected with this sole aim of my inner world. Even my propensity during this period for always travelling and trying to place myself wherever in the process of the mutual existence of people there proceeded sharp energetic events such as civil war, revolutions, etc., had sprung also from this my sole aim. In the first place, during such events I had collected material for clearing up the problems of my principal aim in a more concentrated form and therefore more productively. Secondly, as a result of the memory in my automatic mentation of the sight of all sorts of terrors flowing from the violent events which I had witnessed, and finally from accumulated impressions arising from conversations with various revolutionaries in the previous several years, first in Italy and then in Switzerland and still more recently in Transcaucasia, there had crystallized in me, little by little, besides the previous unique aim, another also unconquerable aim. This other newly arisen aim of my inner world was summed up in this, that I must discover at all costs some manner or means for destroying in people the predilection for suggestibility which causes them to fall easily under the influence of mass hypnosis. And so after this mentioned regeneration of the purpose of my inner world, while there continued the process of the recovery of my health, I composed in my thoughts a preliminary plan for my further activities. And if you think back to the chapter on religion in Beelzebub's Tales, where Beelzebub lays out the list, Saint Lama, Saint Buddha, Saint Moses, Saint Jesus, the reason they all came down and incarnated to the earth was to make people view reality as it actually is, not inverted, not phantasm and illusion, but to see it for what it is. And Gurdjieff just said that there, right? Destroy in people the predilection for suggestibility which causes them to fall easily under the influence of mass hypnosis. And as I mentioned earlier and reference to people under mass psychosis, mass revolutionary psychosis, or the psychosis of war, the psychosis of pandemics, whatever it is, we're highly suggestible. And if you're asleep, you're even more highly suggestible, in my opinion. And hello there, Tyler. Tyler Choice, I'm glad you could make it and that you had a good class. So the idea which flashed into my consciousness on the evening of November the 6th consisted of the following. In all probability, my experience during the last few years of horrible despair and the unusually intense struggle of inner forces which expressed itself this morning in an almost delirious self-reasoning is really nothing else than the direct outcome of the self-reasoning that transpired in me when, in an almost similar state about 30 years ago on the edge of the Gobi Desert. Hello there, Kimmy G. This is a book that we're reading. Welcome. So when I had more or less recovered, I began just from here to continue my researches, but now for two definite aims instead of only one. Here I will not write about what I undertook in continuation, nor of how I satisfied my inner two-headed worm of inquisitiveness, as about this I have already written in enough detail in one of the books of this third series of my writings. On this occasion I will say only that after some years I found it necessary to originate somewhere an institution for the preparation of helper instructors, in order to be able to put into the lives of people what I had already learned. When this need arose, then, after all kinds of comparative mentation, I selected Russia as most appropriate for this purpose. With this aim, I found myself in 1912 in the heart of Russia, the city of Moscow, where at once I started to organize such an institution under the name of the Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man. After 2 years of constant psychophysically tense work, this organization was rapidly nearing completion when suddenly war broke out, a war which no one expected would continue long, but which gradually became chronic and is now called the World War. Years dragged on, years which now already not only continued ceaselessly to demand tense activity from this ill-fated physical body of mine, but sucked from it several times each day every kind of accumulated force for will and patience. I was already beginning, strange as it may seem, to become adapted to the conditions created by this common evil of humanity, when suddenly, very slowly and very unobtrusively, there emerged Madame Russian Revolution. This highly esteemed lady, though not yet standing firmly on her feet, at once began to sow within this poor physical body of mine such injuries and consequences that soon every atom of it cringed and could not get even one's moment's peace. The months flowed slowly by. It seemed that centuries passed. My outer world already began to gasp for breath. At the same time, nevertheless, the vivification produced by the ever-opposing factors of my inner world increased to the highest degree. In this state of inner vividity, it's a nice word, in this state of inner vividity, not easy to say though, try and say it 10 times fast. In this state of inner vividity, without thinking about future prospects, I went into action. Here began once more for this physical body of mine a series of jugglings unusual for the physique of man. I started immediately on a journey, again through impassable places, this time in the mountains of the Caucasus, encountering, of course, as usually occurs on such journeys, frequent hunger and cold, added to which was continual anxiety about my near people, both those who had remained in the chaos behind and those present with me. Then, on the one hand, there began a dysentery in an aggravated form, and on the other hand there occurred an old illness called Saba, angina pectoris, which had been considered entirely cured. After this, several months of life under rough conditions, and then journeys from one country to another with, aside from other things, the still inescapable necessity of being continually on guard, so that neither I nor any one of the young men accompanying me, who as yet had not tasted the delicacies of human life, should fall victim to the, at this time, common European political psychosis. Hello there, Crystal Nines. Welcome. Later, 2 years of ceaseless psychophysical activity for the organization of the Institute, this time in France. At this point in my long and unusual life, capricious and self-willed fate played me a mean trick. By this time it had already become clear, on the one hand, that without exception all I had had in the way of material resources in the country of former Russia had disappeared forever, and on the other, that if within 3 months I did not have at least one cool million francs, I would go up the chimney also forever. And in this ill-fated physical body of mine, fatigued already to the limit, particularly by the last 2 years of strenuous work because of these two surprises, my mentation increased to such proportions that there was scarcely enough room for it in my cerebral cavity. By some miracle or other, my skull did not crack, and consequently I decided to undertake a risky trip to America with many people among whom, most, like myself, knew not one word of the local language, and no one had a penny in his pocket. And then, to conclude all this, as a final chord, this battered physical body of mine, which already had in its presence from its past life the previously enumerated marks, together with an automobile going at a speed of 90 kilometers per hour, crashed into a very thick tree 1 month after my return to Europe from America. From such a promenade, it was discovered I was not yet completely destroyed, and several months later, to my misfortune, into my totally mutilated body there returned in full force, with all its former attributes, my consciousness. Yes, Kathy, you're probably right. It definitely wasn't easy for him to do this, and again, just quickly here, another sort of turn of phrase that shows that he's not identified with his body, right? I was not completely destroyed, and several months later, to my misfortune, into my totally mutilated body there returned in full force, with all its former attributes, my consciousness. Says consciousness left his body, and his body was, in a sense, comatose, and then the consciousness came back to the body, and there's a question that we won't digress into, but where did the consciousness go if it wasn't in his body? Like I say, we don't have to get into that now, but something to consider. I'll leave it there, actually. I'm not going to say any more. After this, very soon, there definitely emerged and became clear the two following unmistakable facts. The first fact consisted in that all that I had finally more or less duly prepared in the last 3 years as a means for the possibility of achieving the second principal aim of my inner world must, due to a long pause in my personal participation, inevitably perish. The second consisted in that, if the damage to my physical body which was caused by the automobile accident could be repaired, it could not in any case be at all soon. When these two indubitable facts became quite clear to me, there began in me, within the already enveloping sphere of physical sufferings, moral sufferings also. By this time I could already move about the house and even ride in an automobile, of course always aided by someone. Trying to be outwardly calm in everything so as not to make my near people solicitous about me, I inwardly, to the accompaniment of these two kinds of sufferings, thought about my situation. During just these thoughts there arose in me a second series of moral sufferings. Yeah, that's a good question there. Spiritual Relief has turned my question around and asked, where did the Wi-Fi go when the phone broke? So yeah, interesting, right? During just these thoughts there arose in me a second series of moral sufferings, namely, I became aware, and after some days of unnoticed observation definitely established the fact, that the terrible illness of my sincerely loved wife, owing to the pause in my special treatment, and also to her forgetfulness of self in ministering to me during my illness, had been so neglected that, by this time, there was already a question as to the possibility of curing her. And in addition to this, the physicians treating my mother, who visited me as old friends, often mentioned to me that her chronic illness of the liver was becoming worse and worse. I intentionally put away from me all thoughts about the reasons for this second series of moral sufferings, because I clearly understood my helplessness. Hey, Laurie, thank you very much. Very kind little super sticker there. So thanks, Laurie. Cheers to you, my friend. All my attention I intentionally concentrated on the causes of my first series of moral sufferings and on bearing their consequences in order not to experience the sufferings of the second series. And so here, if we consider if we consider where he is, right, the position that he's in, he's obviously experienced everything that he's laid out before, the 3 stray bullets, the intense illnesses that he's laid out, then the terrible car accident driving at 90 miles an hour hits a tree, and now his mum and his wife are sort of degenerating very quickly. He's got no money to run the institute, and he's got hundreds of people under his control. So just imagine for a second, right? If try and empathize and consider yourself in that position. Very difficult to do. But anyway, hey, you're welcome, Laurie. Thank you. Just then, after many days of very active and serious mentation, I decided to utilize for my main aim the only means open to me in my condition. I decided to devote all the functions of my inner world to the end that somehow I might expound the very essence of all the material elucidated by me for the welfare of humanity in the form of some kind of exposition. With this decision, the very same day I set about dictating. This was January the 1st, 1925. Hello there, Kenneth. Yes, maybe it's your device. I think if I raise the volume here, someone's device could, blow their ears off. So, yeah, sorry, Kenneth. You'll have to concentrate very, very intently. Yeah, that's what I mean. It will mess up spiritual leaf and everyone else's. With this decision, the very same day I set about dictating. This was January the 1st, 1925. So this is when he begins dictating the works. I say dictating because at first I was still so weak that I could not myself write, but only dictate. You're welcome, Crystal. Very welcome. From this very moment, with physical sufferings and frequently also moral ones of the second series still continuing, I wrote and wrote, made changes and wrote again. From the very beginning, in order to clarify to myself the logical connection and successive development of the ideas of my exposition, I made it a custom in the evenings, both when home and when travelling, frequently to listen in the presence of others to the reading aloud of my current work. These others were always either former pupils of the institute founded by me who still remained with me, or simply old followers of my ideas from different countries whom I had accidentally met in my travels, or who, in accordance with an old habit, continued periodically to visit me. My situation at that time, as previously described, I constated and clearly elucidated for myself already in the month of September, and from then on I frequently thought and thought about it, with the result that finally on the 6th of November I came to the categorical decision mentioned below. Now, after everything which has been explained by me, I think already any reader can easily represent to himself what a dilemma then arose for me when, after working for almost 3 years with unimaginable difficulties and being ready to die happily, I certainly and clearly understood without doubt that, of these writings of mine, people who did not know me personally could understand absolutely nothing. Yes, Kathy, sometimes we need the emotion to pull the the whole organism forward. So my categorical decision, to which I came on the 6th of November 1927, consisted in the following: to mobilize all the capacities and possibilities in my common presence, both those personally achieved and those inherited, and until the moment of the arrival of the next new year, which moment is that of my appearance on God's earth, to discover some possible means of satisfactorily emerging from such a situation. If unable to discover this means, then, on the evening of the last day of the old year, to begin to destroy all my writings, calculating the time so as at midnight with the last page to destroy myself also. From that day on, while trying outwardly to live and work just as before, so that my unusual state should not be noticed by the people surrounding me, I directed my thoughts only to this question of how to emerge from my desperate situation. As my intentional mentation about this was very intense, in a day or two all the thoughts transpiring in me automatically began also to flow exclusively in connection with this question. Time went on. The Christmas holidays were nearing. Engulfed introspectively at all times in such thought, I became perceptibly thinner and more feeble, and what's more, in addition to this, there, for some reason, began to reappear in me the consequences of my former ailments contracted many years before. I remember very well that once during that period, while physically fagged to exhaustion because of a just completed perilous descent in an automobile over a glacier pass in the Pyrenees, sitting in some provincial hole of a caff, I put reproachfully to myself the following question: what now exactly will it be necessary for me to do so that, first of all, I myself may be completely satisfied with my writing, and secondly, that completely corresponding conditions may be created for its spreading? To this concrete question I, after draining a great number of glasses of the local delight called Armagnac, and after sufficiently long and serious mentation, formulated for myself the following answer: both of these completely satisfying wishes could be fulfilled only if there were actualized three definite aims. So here's three definite aims that he's came to. Both of these completely satisfying wishes could be fulfilled only if there were actualized three definite aims. First, that I rewrite anew all of my expositions, but in a new form which I now already understood. Second, and parallel with this, that I study and from all sides make clear to myself the details of some of the, for me, still obscure and very deep questions concerning the common psyche of man, and make use of this information in the development of my writings. And third, that there may be the possibility during this period, while I am fulfilling all this, of renewing my physical body and my spirit to such a degree that, when my writings are completed, I can direct the spreading of them myself with the energy and persistence which was peculiar to me in my youth. That same day, while proceeding on my journey and being absorbed in my fanciful thoughts, I calculated, by the way, that for the study of the mentioned obscure data of the common psyche of man, and for the exposition of my writings in a new form, there would be required not less than approximately 7 years. It will not be amiss to remark here that with regard to my estimate of the period of 7 years, there arose in me a feeling of self-derision, and with such a feeling I thought the following: would it not be curious if I really lived for 7 more years and finished, during this period, everything I have mentioned? If this should in fact occur, then, in addition to everything else accomplished, I would be in a position of one or more excellent and extraordinary examples for a thoroughly practical proof of the law conformably arising consequences resulting from the fundamental cosmic law of sevenfoldness, which law is theoretically explained by me in sufficient detail in my writings. Hello there, Rich. Let's get the party started. We can start partying now. Rich is here. Welcome, Rich. It's nice to see you, my friend. The day before Christmas, I, being already very tired and worn out to the last degree, thanks both to the continually active thinking and to the incessant driving in my automobile, returned to my home in Fontainebleau. After getting out of the automobile, I did not go at once to lie down in bed as I was accustomed to do, but went instead into the garden with the hope that perhaps there in the quiet and under the influence of familiar and cosy surroundings, I might relax a little. Tottering a short distance down a pathway, I, because I was tired, sat down on the first bench I came to. It happened that I sat on the very bench on which it had been my habit during the first year of my writing often to sit and work. At that time there frequently used to come and sit down by me on this bench on each side of me two near beings, the only ones close to my inner world. One of them, always adored by me, was my old mother, and the other my uniquely and sincerely beloved wife. At the present time, both of these women, uniquely nearest to my inner world, peacefully lie forever side by side in a cemetery which is for them as well as for me in an entirely strange country. First to die from a long-standing illness of the liver was my mother. Some months later, from the most terrible contemporary scourge, the disease cancer, went my wife. This country, France, by the way, which is the last resting place for those two beings uniquely nearest to me, but which is indeed absolutely foreign to my nature, remains in my feelings, thanks only to this, as if it were my native land. And so, as I sit on this bench and almost mechanically observe the familiar surroundings in me by the association of ideas, there began to be recollected the different experiences I had had in this same place. Suddenly remembering, I visualized, as though in reality, a picture which I had frequently seen during the short periods of rest from my active mentation. Namely, a picture of how from my left, in the company of two peacocks, a cat and a dog, there slowly strolled down the path my unforgettable old mother. At this point it is impossible not to remark on the relation between my mother and the mentioned animals, as this was indeed unusual in the lives of contemporary people. These four differently natured animals would already know in advance just when my mother was coming out, and, gathering near the door of her home, they would await her appearance, and afterwards, wherever she went, would very sedately accompany her. Always the cat would walk in front, the two peacocks at the sides, and the dog behind. Usually, when my mother left her home, which was called Le Paradis, and proceeded in my direction, where would approach from the house called La Prairie, my wife. Both walked with the help of a stick, and both were stooped. It must be confessed that the bent figure of the first did not touch me so much, because I accounted and accepted this as the normal destiny of every person of esteemed age. But to the bowed posture of the second I was quite unable to reconcile myself. Each time when I noticed it, there arose in me a feeling of revolt, and my heart pounded like that of a balking horse. For it was only a trifling 18 years earlier that, thanks to this now stooped and sallow-faced woman and her accidental presence in the place where the awarding of prizes for beauty was going on in St. Petersburg, the famous Lena Cavalieri, then in the bloom of her youth, was deprived of the first prize. Continuing to sit on the bench, and also continuing not to hinder the automatic flow of thoughts regarding those two dear to me women in connection with this place, I remembered and very strongly experienced in myself again that exact feeling of being deeply touched, which I had more than once experienced when they spoke to each other. Oh, hello there, Tahura. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. I remembered how it often happened that they would sit by my side, one on my right and the other on my left, almost touching me, and so seated that although very quiet, in order not to hinder me, they would sometimes, when I bent forward, concentrating on my work, whisper to each other behind my back. And this whispering of theirs and their complete understanding of each other always caused in me this feeling of being deeply touched. The fact is that my mother knew not one word of the language which my wife spoke, and my wife in turn understood no word of the language which my mother spoke. In spite of this, not only did they very freely interchange their ordinary opinions, but they had imparted to each other in a very short time all the peculiar experiences and the full biographies of their lives. Because of the common object of this centrigravital. It's an interesting word as well. I've heard centrifugal and gravital, but putting them together, Gurdjieff does. Because of the common object of this centrigravital love, there was soon fabricated by them a very peculiar independent dialect, consisting of many different languages. My thoughts, while there still continued in me the experiencing of the mentioned feeling, unnoticed passed again to the theme torturing me during the last days, self-questioning. Thinking again about this, I got up in order to go home, as it was already beginning to get considerably colder. After several steps in my thoughts, there suddenly realized itself, and after only a little confrontation, there was established for me very clearly the following. During the period of my greatest occupation with writing, the quality of my labour ability and its productivity was always the result of, and was dependent upon, the length and gravity of the constating with my active mentation of the automatic, that is, passive experiencings of suffering proceeding in me concerning these two, for me, nearest women. For already, from the very beginning, when I was physically quite helpless, I approached my writing feeling sure beyond a shadow of a doubt the hopelessness of their health and of their imminent deaths. From then on there began to happen this. As soon as my active mentation in regard to the writing question weakened a little, immediately all the spiritual parts of my presence began to associate in me only about them. Excuse me. Hello there, Lena. Welcome. As every kind of association about them entailed always the process of suffering, so I, in order not to experience this unpleasant process, immediately buried myself in the question of writing. It is necessary here to confess that my sufferings were chiefly on behalf of my wife. In this, as I now understand it, my, so to say, implacable revolt against the injustice of causal, self-willed destiny played a great part. The trouble was that, while I was considered by many people at that time, and perhaps even now still am, I don't know, the sole man on earth who could cure completely this illness of hers, nevertheless, at the given time, because of my own illness, I could not do this. Page 40, Tyler. Page 40. The aplomb which I manifested just now can be, if wished, justified and adequately understood by every reader if he will read only one chapter from my writings on the subject of the law of vibrations. And thus, with turbulent feelings and wild thoughts, swaying as if blind drunk, I somehow made my way from the park to my room. There, without undressing, I lay down on my bed and, contrary to all habits, fell asleep immediately and slept through the whole night. And the next morning, when I did awake, the constatation that I had made the previous night recalled itself. I began once more to remember these things and to compare them. Now he's talking about his wife, I think, Tyler, in that last bit. On his wife, yes, he's talking about his wife. The constatation that I had made the previous night recalled itself. I began once more to remember these things and to compare them. And this time, beyond any doubt, I again established that during the first 3 years of my authorship, my labour ability as well as my productivity, in reality at all times strictly corresponded in its duration with the length and quality of the, so to say, degree of contact between my consciousness and the suffering proceeding in me on behalf of my mother and my wife. My labour ability at that time was indeed phenomenal, for I wrote and rewrote at least 10,000 kilos of paper and touched upon almost all questions which could possibly arise in the mentation of man in general. And there is a similar thing. Carl Jung writes in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams and Reflections, that he would set out, he'd have an intention to write stuff, or write this book, the autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and he'd be procrastinating. And when he's procrastinating, he'd get a very intense headache, and it would stay around, it wouldn't leave him until he'd sat down and started writing, at which point the headache would dissipate and he'd be able to get on with his work. And Gurdjieff seems to be talking about a similar thing here. The emotional suffering, the intensity of the emotional suffering that he experiences from the illness of his mother and wife, the only way he could avoid it, the only way he could escape it, was to plunge himself into the writing of the first and second series. Back to the text. And I mean 10,000 kilos of paper. I don't know how many reams that would be, but a good few reams. The establishment at this time with a fresh mind of such a fact perplexed me seriously. It perplexed me seriously because I already knew and had been convinced before without any doubt, thanks to my own manifold experience, that although it is possible to attain any self-imposed aim, it can only be done exclusively through conscious suffering. To explain my case, however, by such an objective possibility was utterly impossible. And it was impossible to explain because in this particular case I suffered unconsciously, while this process proceeded in me automatically in accordance with my typicality and the accidental crystallization in it of corresponding psychic factors. The interest that arose in my being this morning was of such strength that the being thirst possessing me to find at any cost an exit from my difficult situation entirely disappeared, and in its place arose an unconquerable desire to learn the reason for this. Namely, to learn why and in what manner my suffering in this instance could assist in the increase of my labour ability. The beneficent result for me from this inner world revolution occurring within me was that from that moment on I could freely, without influence of partial feelings, again think in my habitual way. The totality of such mentation of mine led to this, that in the evening, while watching the children around the Christmas tree and their unrestrained joy, there suddenly, as if by itself, came into existence in me a conviction of the full possibility of attaining all the 3 tasks indispensable for me through the forces of the inner world struggle, namely, those forces which arise in every person due to incessant friction between his consciousness and the automatic experiencings of his nature. I remember very well that, because of my just mentioned conviction, my whole being was filled as if by some singular, never till now experienced feeling of joy. Simultaneously with this, in me of itself, and without any manipulation on my part, there appeared the sensation of, so to say, self-remembering, also of a never before experienced vigour. When the children's holiday was over, I immediately retreated to my room and locked myself in, of course, making preliminary arrangements that coffee be amply supplied, and began to think of what was to be done further. Just that same night, after a prolonged comparison of thoughts, I decided the following. From the very beginning, from the 1st of January, to begin to work out anew all that I had conceived for exposition, devoting to it only one half of my waking state, and to devote the second half of the whole time of my waking state until April the 23rd, which is my name day, exclusively to the illumination of possible ways of procedure and to the formulation of an approximate plan for later sequential fulfillment. Beginning with the 1st of January, I began to work, not all day long as before, but only at definite hours of the morning and of the evening, devoting the rest of the time either to writing letters of inquiry to some of my friends whom I respect, or to thinking and working out in my mind different details of the general program on the basis of everything that I had already clarified, as well as in terms of psychological and physiological laws known to me. The different conclusions I arrived at during these mentations in the 2 weeks that followed brought me to the point where I decided not to make a detailed program for all my future outer life, but to make one every 3 months. Once every 3 months I was to bring myself into an all centres balanced state, as it is called, and in this state, in accordance with the surrounding conditions of life existing at that time, and also those that might arise in accordance with the theory of probabilities, to make a program in full detail for the succeeding 3 months. On the eve of my name day, in accordance with all the deductions made by me during this time, and also thanks to some wise advice from one of my oldest friends, a very respected person, I finally resolved the following. Parallel with the fulfillment of the detailed program which would be composed by me every 3 months, from my name day on, to carry out into life infallibly to sequential fulfillment the 3 following tasks. First, always in the beginning of the realization, as well as several times during the action, to stimulate artificially within myself the 3 following impulses. For the first aim, that is, for writing, to rouse within myself the impulse of persistence. For the second, that is, for the study of the deep-rooted minutiae of the common psyche of man, the impulse of patience. And for the third, that is, for the renewal of my organism, the suffering resulting from automatic experiencings. So there's some very practical advices there from Mr. Gurdjieff. With your own writing, or maybe reading, or creativities, or whatever it is you're doing, working on yourself, persistence, when studying the deep-rooted minutiae of the common psyche of man, patience, have patience with other people, your colleagues, your family, ignorant people, sleeping people, have patience with them, and with your own organism, suffering. And we read it many times across Beelzebub's tales to his grandson, conscious labours and intentional suffering. And of course, that's the only way to progress, according to Gurdjieff. So very interesting. Second, whomever I should meet for business, commerce, or any other purpose, whether an old or new acquaintance, and whatever his social standing might be, I had immediately to discover his most sensitive corn and press it rather hard. And third, not to refuse anything to my physical body, especially in so far as food is concerned. At the same time, always, after satisfying myself and during digestion, to stimulate within myself, not for less than 15 minutes, the feeling of pity, thinking of other people who had no means of having such food. These 3 just enumerated will tasks, which, it is timely to mention, served as guiding origins for all my intentional activities, were combined by me in order to achieve simultaneously several absolutely different aims. And that's very practical advice there, as I just said, that section. So, of course, go back, note that down, and bring it into your daily life if you so choose. Although these three different aims will also be clarified along with others in the following text of the book, I wish to say already here that in their composition, the constatation in my mentation of one small fact played a large part. Namely, once during my reflections about the construction and functioning of the nervous system of man, I, by the way, remembered and, thinking further, very definitely established the following. During the second period of my, so to say, great illness after the automobile accident, that is, when my consciousness returned, while my body was still helpless, and when I was visited by different friends, then, no matter whether they talked to me or just remained about, for several hours after their departure, I felt very badly. Their sincere sympathy in reality gave birth in me every time to thoughts which may be expressed as follows: came, sucked me out like vampires, and went away. So having decided on this program, I, before beginning the realization in practice of everything thought out by me for unfailing fulfillment, took an oath before my own essence. This was on the night of May 6th, 1928, New Calendar. After the, so to say, simultaneous pacification of numerous tapeworms usual in my house on this day, I again locked myself in my room, and at this time, having brought myself into a suitable state, took for this case my first solemn vow. It will be advisable to mention here, by the way, that on this name day of mine, because of a certain action toward me on the part of the people near me, I decided to realize the following. In the future, under the pretext of different worthy reasons, to remove from my eyesight all those who by this or that make my life too comfortable. During these 7 years, I, in order to make possible the attainment of my then composed aims, infallibly carried out in the sphere of my inner as well as outer world a great number of peculiar will tasks of different durations. I imposed them, changed, rechanged, or dropped them altogether, always in accord, on the one hand, with the already arisen or expected circumstances of my ordinary life, and on the other hand, with the arising in me in connection with writing of new ideas and new desires for the future. Today is the 2nd of April 1935, New Calendar, and the final time limit for the intentional introducing by me into life of all the self-imposed aims and will tasks for the possibility of attainment of the three mentioned fundamental aims will come on the 23rd of April of this same year, Old Calendar. That's right, Donna, and to, I suppose, accept it, to be conscious of it, to be conscious of your suffering, not to want it to go away or stop or lessen, but just to be in it, to sit with it, yes. During this period, because of my scatterbrain trick, really unusual in the life of people, I accomplished more than satisfactory the following. First, puffed 3 small booklets into 10 substantial volumes. Second, not only understood from all sides different deep-rooted minutiae of the common psyche of man, suspected by me and intriguing me all my life, but constated unexpectedly many such delicacies, which, had they been known to Mr. Beelzebub, would, I dare say, grow the horns mentioned by me in the next to last chapter of the first series of my writing, even on his hooves. Third, my health is now in such condition that I not only, as you may see, live and write such an already ultra-fantastic book, but intend to outlive all my past, present, and future conscious enemies. All 3 of the aims self-imposed 7 years ago, I dare say I had already achieved last year, but I decided to continue the fulfillment of different will tasks until the expiration of the 7-year period because of the 3 following reasons. First, last year I was not entirely satisfied with the degree of achievement of my third fundamental aim, namely, during changes of weather, I still felt rather serious rheumatic pain. The second reason consisted in this, that because of the occurrence in these present years of the periodic maximum operation in relation to the earth of the cosmic law Suliunensius, I found the publication of my writings still untimely. I consider it necessary here, concerning the cosmic law just mentioned, to say the following. Of the name alone of such a law I happened to learn for the first time when still very young, from a certain very ancient Armenian papyrus, and the details of this law I accidentally cleared up many years later during my study of the so-called map of pre-sand Egypt, which had come also together accidentally into my possession. To odds and ends out of the totality of what I cleared up about the law of Suliunensius, I referred, it seems, in the second book of the first series of my writings in the chapter entitled Russia. And as to the third reason, it is necessary for its elucidation to say first the following. This book, which I am now writing, was originally intended to be the last book of the third series of my writings which will be published. The first was begun and finished in a form entirely satisfactory to me already long ago. On this book I set to work at the end of the third year of my literary activity and, working at it only at intervals, completed it in 3 years. Can all be used for work, can't it, Donna, crystal and spiritual relief? It's all work, if you allow it to be. Right, guys, last few pages, so thank you for your patience and your company. And let's finish up these last several pages. Notwithstanding the fact that for the writing of such a, as it might be called, summarizing concluding book, I had to put in a great deal of labour, unpleasant experiences and money, etc., I was nevertheless compelled, almost on the very day when I finally completed it, to destroy it in its entirety, all this my tedious work of many years. I was compelled to destroy not only this book itself, but also everything prepared for the affirmation of the spirit of its essence. During just that period when I was finishing the writing of this concluding book, the functioning of both my usual mentations, that is, active and passive, proceeded tensely with unusual intensity. With my active mentation, I was putting the, so to say, last polish on the contents of this book so important for the whole totality of my writings, and the passive was occupied with the transformation of that same material which more than anything else had assisted me in having, at the present time, ideal health. So, just then, while fulfilling in constant intensity of mentation my various will tasks, I began to notice in my own inner world, as well as in others, many particularities previously unknown to me. And when I began for my own conviction to check statistically these unexpectedly noticed particularities and to establish the fact of their actuality, then I found all that I had written in this last book entirely worthless for my premeditated aim. So, thanks to this, the third reason thus consisted in this, that it was necessary for this predetermined aim to write a new book with an entirely new content. Having just written about publishing this book, I must now willy-nilly say something concerning one certain measure applied by me for the possibility of attaining the aim set myself, which, to explain clearly, would require my bringing in here and citing the following. I would have to cite all verbal formulations for the particularities and laws which recently have become known to contemporary people through, as they are called, radiography, telepathy, and to bring in its entirety the whole science of white and black magic. As it is utterly impossible to do this, I shall therefore limit myself to saying the following. 3 years ago, when there had simultaneously arisen 3 very serious facts hindering my work and insuperable by usual means, I then, among other measures unusual in the life of people for the purpose of conquering these uninvited guests, also wrote one small booklet under the title The Herald of Coming Good. This I wrote especially for certain people who had already long been considered followers of my ideas, or, during the existence of the institute founded by me, had been pupils in one or another of its branches. This booklet was printed in 9 languages, 1,000 copies in each language. Although every measure was then taken to prevent its falling into the hands of people who as yet did not know me, this was not entirely achieved, and now, to the number of several hundred copies, it is unfortunately, as it is said, passing from hand to hand. And so, having this in mind, I consider it my duty, for the possibility of attaining my 3rd fundamental aim, also to entire satisfaction, to give here the following advice. If you as yet have not read this book entitled The Herald of Coming Good, then thank the circumstances and do not read it. And here I think we were talking about this many months ago in the Discord group, right? Is this a if you have yet not read this book entitled The Herald of Coming Good, then thank the circumstances and do not read it. Is it reverse psychology? Is he tempting us to read it, or should we take heed? I suppose it's up to an individual to decide. Just here it will not be amiss to say also that for the possibility of attaining my 3rd fundamental aim, also to entire satisfaction, I for the past year even ceased to write. Not only intentionally ceased writing, but even for the past year have always, in so far as possible, of course with a very great inner struggle, not admitted the proceeding in me of any active mentation. I resorted to such a really barbarous measure in order that the automatically experienced sufferings proceeding in me, by means of which chiefly I have achieved this aim of mine, should be actualized in me more productively. Even my last journey to America was made chiefly for the purpose of obtaining this productivity. And this was in consequence of the fact that after the terrible automobile accident which happened to me, I mingled only with Americans, and therefore almost all of my acquaintances of the last decade are there. And in view of this, I could, without resorting to any special measures, always very easily have at my disposal fertile soil of all kinds of degrees of vivifyingness, for the sowing of divine seeds, for the germination of beneficent factors for my being. Hey, thanks for that, Graham. I'm gonna listen to that. Them heavy people, yeah? Although all the strange will tasks and original principles which I have applied to life during the last 7 years are, as already stated, elucidated in the subsequent text of this book, yet the feelings of admiration and gratitude overflowing in me bid the whole of me here in the initial chapter to comment on that principle of mine for outer life, which unexpectedly became for me, so to say, the inexhaustible source. I refer to that already mentioned principle which I characterized by the words, to press the most sensitive corn of everyone I met. Thanks to this principle, which turned out to be miracle working for me, I, besides having always and everywhere an abundance of material for my chief aim, that is, for my regeneration, also, thanks only to it, so affected everyone who met me that he himself, without any effort on my part whatsoever, as if with great satisfaction and complete readiness, took off his mask, present took off his mask presented to him with great solemnity by his papa and mama, and thanks to this I at once acquired an unprecedentedly easy possibility of unhurriedly and quietly feasting my eyes on what his inner world contained, not only of the accidentally surviving worthy data proper to man, but also of the nauseating filth accumulated from his absolutely abnormal so-called education. This, and only this, for me, divine principle enabled me to discern and understand at least those deeply hidden nuances of the human soul that had intrigued me all my life. To it and to it alone I am indebted for all that I now possess. And I possess such inner wealth that, in the objective sense, it is worth many times more than all the money that can be imagined by the human brain, such as, for example, the whole estate which fell to the so-called New York 5 and 10 heiress, plus all the money hoarded in cash by the peasants of France. However, concerning the significance and the value of the inner wealth acquired by me, I will also explain in detail at the end of this last book. Meanwhile, in order to acclaim this principle, I shall say that on account of it I lost all without exception that I possessed of what people call wealth. Because of it I lost not only the wealth that I possessed, but also all so-called friends, and even the, so to say, privilege of being envied, in a word, all that because of which only I was several years ago considered by a great many people no mere dog's tail, but one of the first-ranking aces of contemporary life. In spite of all this, I, today, when I write these lines, and when the surrounding conditions of my ordinary life grown law-abidingly worse and worse because of my inflexible carrying out in life of the tasks set myself, and among them this principle of mine, are already so far gone that I cannot even imagine how I shall pull through, bless this principle with all my being. About the circumstances of ordinary life which have today resulted for me, I shall without fail explain also at the end of this book, if, of course, I succeed in somehow carrying on for one more month. And I shall then explain also why I use the expression grown law-abidingly worse. I shall without fail explain it, for in all this there is not only much that is instructive, but also such comicality that, if all the wits got together purposely to think it up, they could not think up even the 10th part of it. Having expressed my gratitude to this principle for the acquisition of my inner riches, I must now be quite impartial and put the question squarely. Is this so? Could this principle invented by me be also, in all other surrounding conditions of ordinary life, such a vivifying factor? Frankly speaking, according to the opinion of my subconscious, I must say no. This could have happened only thanks to the general material crisis. I must therefore express my thanks to such a general human misfortune. Since it would be rather awkward to do that, I shall therefore retain my former opinion. Now, while expressing half-mockingly my gratitude to this uncertain factor for the inner riches which I now possess, I remembered many living people near to me who, because of my mentioned egoistic ideas, must have had many disappointments. Among such people who willingly or unwillingly did not have a very sweet life, there were many really near to me in blood as well as in spirit. In concluding this chapter of the third series of my writings, I, almost on the eve of the sequential fulfillment of my egotistical aims, addressing all those near to me, shall speak only about two substantial factors formed in my inner world. The first, formed in my being while yet in childhood, and which is the sovereign of my convictions, may be formulated as follows. Only then may a man be a good altruist to his nearest, when at times he can be a complete egoist. And that's very powerful, and one that we should remember. Only then may a man be a good altruist to his nearest, when at times he can be a complete egoist. And the second was formed within me 2 years after I began to actualize the 3 aims of my 7-year task. While working intensively on the books intended for publication under conditions of law-abidingly arisen misfortunes, when I noticed that because of my pursuit of my egoistical ideas, those near me were becoming worse and worse, once brought myself into a state of mind by a technique I acquired from my father, and through self-suggestion crystallized in my presence this psychic factor in terms of the following supposition. If I should attain my self-imposed aims and should still survive, then I would live with a definite program as follows. 1/3 of all my waking state I shall devote to pleasures of my own body. The second, third, exclusively to those by that time remaining near to me in spirit as well as in blood, and the third part to science, that is, to all humanity. Thus now, after everything that has been clarified in this introductory chapter, I advise and at that very sincerely all my readers, both those who know me and those who do not, and also all my dear friends and not less dear enemies, to try to understand properly the essence of the text of this my last book, and especially the essence of the concluding chapter. The concluding chapter of my final book I intend to name The Inner and Outer World of Man, and to explain in it a question unusual in the mentation of people, but nevertheless the most preeminent of all questions, from the totality of which follow almost all the misunderstandings of our common lives. Very sincerely I advise you to understand it because, if nothing else, the common presence of every one will acquire a perhaps even subconsciously acting factor pacifier for the larger part of the futile worries and moral sufferings occurring in their lives. Above, I use the word enemies, not casually, but because first, the very best friends for my real self, that is, for my inner world, appear, strange as it may seem, to be some from among a great number of my staunch enemies at the present time scattered all over the world, and because second, it may serve me ideally as a good example for the concluding chapter of the present book, and therefore I shall use it as such. Recollecting now through association some of such enemies especially dear to my inner world, I, feeling sincerely touched, wished already here in this introductory chapter of my last book, for their pleasure or displeasure, to quote a few from among the sayings known to me, sayings of popular wisdom which have reached our days through legomenisms from the ancient days. I said for their pleasure or displeasure because I do not know which current of life's river they follow at present. Okay, bye Laurie. Look after yourselves, and we're nearly finished now anyway, last page. But I just gonna read that bit again because it's rather interesting. I said for their pleasure or displeasure because I do not know which current of life's river they follow at present. So are you following the, again, pleasure or displeasure? Which what one are you in? You choose, really. I would argue that one can choose consciously, and a lot of people unconsciously stay in the displeasurable river without even knowing that they can just hop over to the pleasurable one. Since then, much time has elapsed. Whether they have remained in that current of life's river into which I, unmerciful to myself, had directed them, just that current which sooner or later must fall into the fathomless ocean, I do not know, or whether the temptations of life, likewise law-abiding, have pushed them into the current which sooner or later must fall into the abyss for further evolution. And so, the first of these sayings of popular wisdom runs as follows. And here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, a series of 5 little sayings. And they are as follows. A man is not a pig to forget good, nor is he a cat to remember evil. The first refusal to a person who is devoid of conscience or consideration will destroy the results of even thousands of good deeds formerly manifested toward him by you. Only that person is worthy to be a follower of any religion who, although he remembers the wrong done to him by someone, will not manifest any evil toward him. You will be reasonable only then when you will learn to distinguish your future good or evil from that of your present. And finally, such is the nature of man that for your first gift he prostrates himself, for your second kisses your hand, for the third fawns, for the fourth just nods his head once, for the fifth becomes too familiar, for the sixth insults you, and for the seventh sues you because he was not given enough. That ends the prologue. Tomorrow we'll be back to read the introduction, which is much shorter. This was a rather marathon prologue, but I very much enjoyed it. To be honest, thanks to the wonderful company I was in. You guys, although the chat was buzzing along rather quickly, so I'm afraid I wasn't able to keep up with all of the chat, but I did catch people leaving and making very good comments. And if you made a good comment and I missed it, then I apologize for that. Tahuria says, thank you, bro. What a treasure it has been to come across your channel. I'm happy to hear that you've found us. Also, like I say, it's wonderful to see book club growing as it is, and for more and more people coming to join us for our Gurdjieff travels. Tyler Choice, says it's a treasured time. And like I say, it's been fantastic. Kimmy G, I hope you're all right, my friend, and that you're not too distressed. But yes. J.K. Tecker says, great reading, Lewis. Crystal Nines puts up a little... Crystal Nines puts up a trophy. Captain Freeman asks, where do you suggest to buy the works of Gurdjieff? My local library doesn't have any of his works. It's a... you may have to go online. I have them all in PDF format, Captain Freeman. So if you want to send me a email, I'll happily share some with you. Obviously not all of them because it would take rather a long time, but the ones that I think are most popular, or if you have a couple that you're after, I'll likely have them in PDF format. And so send me an email. I'll send them over to you if you're happy to have them just in ebook form, in PDF. Tyler says, on last quote, it seems that to deny a bad person after thousands of good deeds is to prove to them that they were right about humans. They always let you down. Yeah, I don't know about that. I think it's just humans want more and more and they become familiar. Like he's saying, they're very happy in the beginning, and then towards the end, after they've become accustomed to your generosity, they'll sue you for not giving them enough. So it's difficult. Donna says, great book and a great reading. So it's lovely to see you, Donna. And it's lovely to see all of you. Because, like I say, this is what it's all about here at Book Club, sharing this. As we were talking earlier, when we went a bit deep, and as Laurie said, the chat got a bit lit when Gurdjieff was mentioning God. It's powerful text, powerful teachings. I would say if you're new and you've been a bit lost in this reading, In Search of the Miraculous is the place to start. Kiaora or Tiahora says, thank you so much. You're most welcome. Spiritual Relief, it's a pleasure. And Stephen Larn, what a way to finish. Look at that, Stephen Larn. going for glory for the final word of the stream. Stephen, you're very kind. Thank you very much. Kimmy G is clapping, so I hope you're okay there, Kimmy G, and thank you. And everyone else who is listening quietly, I see you, and thank you for being here with us and for sharing in this journey. So, tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, we'll be back for the introduction. If you haven't seen it, there is a new video up about what book we should read next. And if you don't comment before in the next few hours, you won't be able to have a say, because I'm tallying up all of the votes and all of the suggestions and recommendations, and I'll be setting up a poll tomorrow. So if you want to have an impact in which 8 books become 4, become 1, then go and watch that video. I think it's called Important What Book Next, Have Your Choice, or something like that. So yes. LA Gladiators, I haven't considered reading The Faces in the Water, but I'll look into it and watch out. Excuse me. Tyler Choice, you're very welcome, my friend. Thank you for being here and all of your great comments. And so, yeah, that's all for today. Back tomorrow at 9 p.m. for a shorter reading of the introduction. And then on Sunday, we will have whatever book wins the poll, we will begin. So everyone, thanks again so much. Mikkel says, much appreciated. I appreciate you too, my friend. And guys, look after yourselves. Have a great rest of the week, rest of your day, morning, afternoon, evening. And I hope to see you this time tomorrow for the next part of Life is Real, Only Then When I Am. Guys, take care now. Peace.